Section 11.1, quadratic equations, solving quadratic equations. By completing the square. So let me do on page 476, problem number 49. In exercises 49 through 60, find the number that shall be added to the expression to make it a perfect square. So x squared plus 4x. So what I want to do here is I want to make this into a perfect square. So it looks like something squared. So let me take 4 divided by 2. So that's 2. And so if I use the special product formula, I just get that this is equal to x squared plus x times 2 times 2, 4x, plus 2 squared, 4. So the number that I should add to x squared plus 4x is the number 4. Let me do problem number 51. Y squared plus 7y. And so since there is a 1 in front of the y squared, I'll just add y divided by 2 squared is 49 over 4. And so if I add 49 over 4 to my original expression, I get a perfect square. Let me do problem number 53. P squared minus 6p since there's a 1 in front of the p squared, then let me take negative 6 divided by 2. Negative 3 squared is 9. So if I add 9 to my expression, I get a perfect square. Let me do problem number 55. T squared minus t. So, since there's a 1 in front of the t squared, then let me take negative 1 divided by 2, negative 1/2, squared, 1/4, and add that to my expression to get a perfect square. Let me do problem number 57. X squared plus 2x. To make x squared plus 2x into a perfect square, since there's a 1 in front of the x squared, I take 2 divided by 2, which is 1. 1 squared is 1, and so add 1 to my expression, and that will make it into a perfect square. 59, x squared plus 6x. Again, since there's a 1 in front of the x squared, I'll just take 6 divided by 2, 3. 3 squared is 9, and add that to my expression to get a perfect square. Lastly, let me do problem number 61. In exercises 61 through 72, complete the square. Okay, so I have here x squared plus 8x plus 9. So this is equal to x squared plus 8x plus 9. So since there's a 1 in front of the x squared, I just take 8 divided by 2. This gives me 4. 4 squared is 16. And so I'm going to add and subtract 16 so that I do not change the value of the expression. And so I get that this is equal to x plus 4, quantity squared. 9 minus 16 is negative 7. And I have completed the square. Let me do problem number 63. X squared minus 4x plus 5 Since there's a 1 in front of the x squared, I have negative 4 divided by 2 is a negative 2. Squared is 4. So let me add and subtract 4. And so I have that 5 minus 4 is 1. And so I have completed the square. Do problem number 65. Y squared plus 2y minus 10. So this is equal to y squared plus 2y minus 10. And so, since there's a 1 in front of the y squared, I'll just take 2 divided by 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1. Let's subtract, add and subtract 1. And so I get that this is equal to y plus 1 quantity squared minus 11. And I have completed the square. Let me do problem number 67. Z squared minus 8z plus 7. So I have z squared minus 8z plus 7. Let me complete the square. Since there's a 1 in front of the z squared, I just take negative 8 divided by 2 is a negative 4. Squared is 16. Add and subtract 16. And so I have that this is equal to z minus 4 quantity squared minus 9. And I have completed the square. 69. Three x squared minus 6x plus 9. So this is equal to 3x squared minus 6x plus 9. And so let me complete the square. Since there is a 3 in front of the x squared, I will take negative 6 divided by 3 times 2, 6. So negative 6 divided by 6 is a negative 1. Negative 1 squared is 1 times 3 is 3. And so I'll add and subtract 3. And so I get 3 times x minus 1 squared plus 6. And I have completed the square. Let me do 71. X squared minus 3x plus 16. So I have x squared minus 3x plus 16. Since there's a 1 in front of the x squared, I'll take negative 3 divided by 2 is negative 3 halves. Negative 3 halves squared is 9 fourths. So let me add and subtract 9 fourths. And so I get x minus 3 halves quantity squared plus, let me multiply and divide by 4. And so I get 64 minus 9, 55 over 4. And that is your answer. Let me do problem number 73. In exercises 73 to 105, solve the equation by completing the square. So I have x squared plus 4x plus 2 equals 0. Subtract 2 from both sides of my equation. So if x squared plus 4x is equal to negative 2. Now, since there's a 1 in front of the x squared, I'll take 4 divided by 2, which is 2. 2 squared is 4. So let me add 4 to both sides of my equation. 4 minus 2 is 2. By the square root property, I have that x plus 2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 2. Subtract 2 from both sides of your equation. And so I have that x is equal to negative 2 plus or minus rad 2. And that is your answer. Let me do problem number 75. Z squared plus 2z minus 10 equals 0. Let me add 10 to both sides of my equation. So I have z squared plus 2z is equal to 10. Let me complete the square. Since there's a 1 in front of the z squared, I'll just take 2 divided by z, 1. 1 squared is 1. add that to both sides of my equation. And so, by the square root property, I have that z plus 1 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 11. Subtract 1 from both sides of your equation. And so z is equal to negative 1 plus or minus rad 11. And that is your answer. Let me do problem number 77. Y squared minus 4y minus 9 equals 0. Let me add 9 to both sides of my equation. And so I have y squared minus 4y is equal to 9. And so, since there's a 1 in front of the y squared, I'll take negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2 squared, which is 4. Add that to both sides of your equation. And so, by the square root property, I have that y minus 2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 13. Add 2 to both sides of your equation. And so y is equal to 2 plus or minus rad 13. Let me do 79. A squared minus 2a minus 1 is 0. Add 1 to both sides of your equation. So you have a squared minus 2a is equal to 1. Since there's a 1 in front of the a squared, I'll just take negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 squared is 1. Add 1 to both sides of your equation. 1 plus 1 is 2. By the square root property, I have that a minus 1 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 2. Add 1 to both sides of your equation. And so a is equal to 1 plus or minus rad 2. 81. X squared plus 8x is equal to 0. Okay, so let me complete the square. And so, let me since there's a 1 in front of the x squared, I'll just take 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 squared is 16. Let me add 16 to both sides of your equation. And so, I have that x plus 4 by the square root property is equal to plus or minus the square root of 16. And so x plus 4 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 16, which is 4. And so let me subtract 4 from both sides of my equation. Okay, and so I have that x is equal to negative 4 plus or minus 4. And so, negative 4 minus 4 is negative 8. Negative 4 plus 4 is 0. So I have x is negative 8 or x is 0. And that is your answer. Let me do problem number 83. X squared plus 8x is equal to 7. And so let me complete the square. Since there's a 1 in front of the x squared, 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 squared is 16. Let me add 16 to both sides of my equation. So by the square root property, I have that x plus 4 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 23. Let me subtract 4 from both sides of my equation. So x is equal to negative 4 plus or minus rad 23. Let me do problem number 85. T squared plus 6t is equal to negative 8. And so let me complete the square. Since there's a 1 in front of the t squared, 6 divided by 2 is 3. 3 squared is 9. Let me add 9 to both sides of your equation. So by the square root property, I have that t plus 3 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 1. The square root of 1 is just 1. Let me subtract 3 from both sides of my equation. So I get that t is equal to a negative 3 plus or minus 1. Negative 3 minus 1 is negative 4. Negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2. And so I have x is negative 4, or t is negative 4, or t is negative 2. 87. A squared minus 8a is equal to 3. Okay, so let me complete the square. Since there's a 1 in front of the a squared, I take negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4 squared is 16. Add 16 to both sides of your equation. So by the square root property, I have that a minus 4 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 19. Let me add 4 to both sides of my equation. So a is equal to 4 plus or minus rad 19. And that is your answer. Let me do 89. Two r squared minus 4r is equal to 2. Well, I can do this the same way I did in the previous section, like, 69, I guess only 69. But I can simplify this by just dividing everything here by 2. Then there'll be a 1 in front of the r squared. So I have r squared minus 2r is equal to 1. So now let me complete the square. Since there's a 1 in front of the r squared, that's why I divided by 2. So there would be no 2 there. Then I can just take negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 squared is 1. So I can add 1 to both sides of my equation. By the square root property, I have that r minus 1 is equal to plus or minus rad 2. Add 1 to both sides of your equation. So I get that r is equal to 1 plus or minus radical 2. And that is your answer. Let me do problem number 91. X squared is equal to 2x plus 4. So I want all x's on the left-hand side of my equation. So let me subtract 2x from both sides of my equation. So I have x squared minus 2x is equal to 4. So let me complete the square. Since there's a 1 in front of the x squared, negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 squared is 1. Let me add 1 to both sides of my equation. So by the square root property, I have that x minus 1 is just equal to plus or minus the square root of 5. Let me add 1 to both sides of my equation. So x is equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of 5. Let me do problem number 93. Negative y squared plus 4y plus 3 equals 0. Let me multiply both sides of my equation by negative 1. Then there'll be a 1 in front of the y squared. And that'll just make this calculation a little bit easier. And so I have y squared minus 4y minus 3 equals 0. Add 3 to both sides of my equation. So I have y squared minus 4y is equal to 3. So let me complete the square. Since I have a 1 in front of the y squared, negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. Negative 2 squared is 4. So let me add 4 to both sides of my equation. So y minus 2 quantities squared is equal to 7. By the square root property, I have that y minus 2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 7. Let me add 2 to both sides of my equation. And so I have that y is equal to 2 plus or minus the square root of 7. Let me do problem number 95. Four k squared minus 8k minus 2 equals 0. I can at least divide by 2. That won't get rid of the constant in front of the k squared, but at least it'll make it slightly smaller. Okay, so now let me bring the 1, let me add 1 to both sides of my equation. so that the k's are on the left-hand side only. So I have 2k squared minus 4k is equal to 1. So let me complete the square. I have negative 4 divided by 2 times 2. 2 times 2 is 4. Negative 4 divided by 4 is a negative 1. Negative 1 squared is 1 times 2 is 2. So let me add 2 to both sides of my equation. 1 plus 2 is 3. Divide both sides of my equation by 2. And so I have that y minus 1 squared is equal to 3 halves. So by the square root property, I have that k minus 1 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 3 halves. Add 1 to both sides of my equation. And so I have that k is equal to 1 plus or minus rad 3 over 2. Now, I want to complete the square here. So let me multiply and divide by rad 2. So this becomes rad 2 times rad 3 is rad 6. 2 times 2 is 4. The square root of 4 is 2. So let me get a common denominator. Let me multiply and divide by 2. So I get that k is equal to 1 times 2 is 2 plus or minus rad 6 all over 2. And that is your answer. Let me do problem number 97. X minus 2, x plus 5 is equal to 4. So let me multiply this out. So I have x squared plus 5x minus 2x is plus 3x minus 10 equals 4. Let me add 10 to both sides of my equation. And so you have that x squared plus 3x is equal to 14. Let me complete the square. Since there's a 1 in front of the x squared, I just take 3 divided by 2, 3 halves, squared, 9 fourths, and add that to both sides of my equation. Well, let me get a common denominator. So let me multiply and divide by 4. And so this gives me 56 plus 9, 65 over 4. So by the square root property, I have that x plus 3 halves is equal to plus or minus the square root of 65 over 4. The square root of 4 is just 2. Let me subtract 3 halves from both sides of my equation. And so I have that x is equal to negative 3 halves plus or minus the square root of 65 halves. And that is your answer. Let me do 99. 3 p plus 7 p plus 4 equals 5. So let me multiply this out. So I get 3p squared plus 12p plus 7p is 19p plus 7 times 4, 28 is equal to 5. Ooh, 7 and 12. Yeah. And so let me subtract 28 from both sides of my equation. So you have 3p squared plus 19p is equal to negative 23. So let me complete the square. Since there is 3 from the p squared, I'll just take 19 divided by 3 times 2, 6. So 19 over 6. Square that. And so you get plus 19 squared, which was at 371 over 36. 19 squared is 81, 17, 19, 361. 2, 3, 16. Yeah, 361 over 19 over 36. So add 361 over 36 to both sides of your equation. Let me multiply and divide by 36 to get a common denominator. 23 times 36 is 828. I have to move this down. So it's 828 over 36 plus 361 over 36. Okay, so let me add these together. That's 7 negative 400, negative 467 over 36. Okay. And so, let me divide both sides of my equation by 3. And so I have here p plus 19 over 6 squared is equal to a negative 467 over 108. Let me multiply and divide by 3. So I have p plus 19 over 6 is equal to negative 1301 over 324. And so, by the square root property, I have that, oops, where's the square? That p plus 19 over 6 is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 1301 over 324, which is equal to plus or minus I rad 1301 over square root of 324 is 18. Wait. Yes, 324. Okay. So square root is 18. And so let me multiply both sides of my equation by 18. So I get 18p plus 57 is equal to plus or minus I rad 1301. Wait 1 second, because that's only 5. There's something wrong there. 467 times 3. That's a 1401. Okay, good. Subtract 57 from both sides of your equation. Okay. So, oops. So I get that 18p is equal to negative 57 plus or minus I rad 1401. Divide both sides of your equation by, here, wait, 18. And so you get that p, I'll tie it up here, that p is equal to negative 57 plus or minus I rad 1401 over 18. Let me just look at this for 1 second. I'm just quickly checking it just for, because that's kind of a long problem. Okay. Actually, I think I can divide that by 9. Oh, shoot. Oh, you should. Okay. Okay, let me just do this again. Okay, so this is equal to 3p squared plus 12p plus 7p is 19p plus 28. Subtract 28 from both sides of your equation. So you get 3p squared plus 19p is equal to negative 23. Okay. Let me complete the square. So I have 19 divided by 6. And so let me multiply that out. And so 19 squared is 361. Over 36. Okay, so let me add that. To the other side of my equation. Let me write this over 1. And so I have, getting common denominator, I have a negative 828 over 36 plus 361 over 36 and so that's 828. Okay, so now let me just subtract 361 minus the 828. And so I have negative 467 over 36. Okay. Let me divide by 3. And so I have P plus 19 over 6 squared equals negative. Let me just check something. Okay. So this is equal to negative 463 over 36 times 1/3. But let's make it into a perfect square. So let's just multiply and divide by 3. So this is equal to P plus 19 over 6 squared is equal to a negative 469 times 3, negative 1407 over 9 times 36 324. And so by the square root property, I have that this is P plus 19 over 6 is equal to negative, or the square plus or minus the square root of negative 1407 over 324. Okay. And so this is equal to plus or minus the square root of 1407i over 18. Multiply both sides of my equation by 18. So I get 18p plus 57 and so 18 divided by 6 is 3. 19 times 3 is 57. The 18s cancel. Subtract 57 from both sides of my equation. And so you get 18p is equal to negative 57 plus or minus I rad 1407. And so, I have that P is equal to negative 57 plus or minus I rad 1407 over 18. Which seems to be the exact same answer I got from before. Okay, so let me just check one last time. 3p plus 7, p plus 4, equal 5. Okay, well, it's supposed to be p is equal to, I'm supposed to be able to divide by 3 here. So it's supposed to be a negative 19 plus or minus. And that's supposed to be a positive. Why did I multiply by 3? You stupid jerk. Oh, man. I made the same stupid error twice. Okay, so I think this is stupid. Okay. Okay, well, why do I make a stupid error not once, but the same stupid error twice? That is amazing, isn't it? Well, okay, well. Let me do problem 99 correctly. Okay, let's start over again from the beginning. 3p times p is 3p squared, plus 3p times 4 is 12p, plus 7p is 19p. 7 times 4 is 28. Let me complete the square. Subtract 28 from both sides of my equation. So you get 3p squared plus 19p is equal to negative 23. And so let me complete the square. And so, since there is a 3 in front of the p squared, I take 19 divided by 3 times 2, which is 6. Oops. Which is 19 over 6. And so, let me square that. 19 squared is 361. 6 squared is 36 times 3. 36 divided by 3 is 12. And so, let me get a common denominator. And so the common denominator is 12. So let me multiply and divide by 12. 12 times 23 is 276. 361 minus 276 is a positive 85. Divide both sides of your equation by 3. So you get that P plus 19 over 6 squared is equal to 85 over 36. So by the square root property, I have that P plus 19 over 6 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 85 over 36. The square root of 85 over the square root of 36, which is 6. Subtract 19 over 6 from both sides of my equation. And so you get that P, is equal to a negative 19 over 6 plus or minus the square root of 85. And that is the correct answer. That has to be the correct answer. Okay, sorry about that. And so, don't know exactly what was going on there to get it wrong more than once, but okay. Let me do problem number 101. Three p squared plus 7, oops, 3 x squared plus 7x is equal to 0. Okay, so let me do this. So let me complete the square. 7 divided by 3 times 2 is 6. 7 squared is 49. 6 squared is 36 times 3 is 12. So let me add 49 over 12 to both sides of the equation. So this is equal to 49 over 12. Let me multiply both sides of my equation by 12. So you get 36 times x plus 7 over 6 squared is 49. Divide both sides of your equation by 36. So you get that x plus 7 over 6 squared is equal to 49 over 36. By the square root property, I have that x plus 7 over 6 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 49 over 36. Which is just 7 over 6. Subtract 7 over 6 from both sides of your equation. And so I have that x is equal to negative 7 plus or minus 7 over 6. And so I get x is equal to negative 7 minus 7, negative 14 over 6, which is negative 7 over 3, or x is equal to negative 7 plus 7, 0 over 6, which is 0. Let me do problem 103. X squared over 3 plus x over 2 is equal to 4. Let me multiply by 6 to get rid of the parentheses, to get rid of the denominator. And so 6 divided by 3 is 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 6 times 4 is 24. So let me complete the square. 3 divided by 2 times 2, 4. 3 over 4. 3 squared is 9. 4 squared is 16. Times 2 is 8. So let me add 9 over 8 to both sides of my equation. Let me multiply and divide by 8. And so I have, I guess I'm going to have to move this. There it is. (24) times 8, 192. Over 8 plus 9 over 8. (201) over 8. Divide both sides of your equation by 2. So I have that x plus 3/4 is equal to 201 divided by 16. Take by the square root property, I have that x plus 3/4 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 201 over the square root of 16, 4. Subtract 3/4 from both sides of your equation. So x is equal to a negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 201 all over 4. And that's your answer. Okay. Let me do problem 105. x squared over 8 minus x over 4 is equal to 1. Let me multiply both sides of my equation by 8. And so I have the 8's cancel. 8 divided by 4 is 2. That works out nicely. So let me complete the square. Negative 2 divided by 2 is a negative 1 squared is 1. 8 plus 1 is 9. Therefore, by the square root property, x minus 1 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 9. Add 1 to both sides of your equation. And so x is equal to 1 plus or minus 3. And so x is equal to 1 minus 3, negative 2. X is equal to 1 plus 3, positive 4. And that finishes off section 11.1. And I guess then that would be it for today. Wait. Oh.